I suppose if you haven't been at the coalface of business over the last number of months, any other business leaders, to really sort of evaluate your own organization and perhaps ask yourself some maybe very serious questions that you haven't had time to ask in the past. Questions like, how well prepared are we for an uncertain future? How do we retain the sort of people we're going to need going forward? And have we really got the internal resources that we need to build resilience? A synergy is the cooperation of two or more agents to produce an effect that's greater than the individual parts. And that's important when I talk about the power of synergy, because can you imagine if all the departments in your organization were actually working together seamlessly to give you that combined effect that we're all looking for? I suppose over the last 40 years, what I have seen in business is I've seen the power of synergy and how it's helped sort of create a situation of innovation, productivity, recruiting the right people and then retaining them, and more importantly, fostering and building resilience. And so today, really what I want to talk about in the short time I've got with you is I want to talk about the obstacles that get in the way of synergy in your own organization. The hidden costs that so many people just don't see happening around them, and some suggestions on how you might overcome those obstacles. I'm going to take you back to when I was in my early 20s. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, this is a history lesson, isn't it? No, I'm not that old, but at the same time, it goes back quite some time. And the reason I want to take you back then is because it was the trigger for me thinking of this particular talk. I was sitting in the city centre branch of one of the major banks. It was 6:30 on a Thursday evening in June, and it was beautiful weather outside as opposed to what we're seeing here. And I was just feeling sorry for myself. I was eating this sandwich, and the reason I was there was we were doing overtime again. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, most of us wanted overtime. I mean, overtime is something you hardly ever see today, but back then, overtime was really one of those things we liked, time and a half and all of those things. And it was fantastic to get it. Really loved getting that overtime. But why were we doing overtime? This is the question. In our particular place, there had been, over the course of the last 6 months prior to this, interest rate changes going on all around Europe. And every time there was an interest rate change, a team of 6 of us had to go in and had to spend up to 2 weeks from 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight sometimes, manually calculating the changes to each of more than 30,000 deposit accounts. Wow. Yes, that was before computerization. It's probably before a lot of you were born as well. But it was important that we were accurate in doing that, because if we found mistakes, we ended up having to correct them at our own cost. But anyway, listen, let me take you back to that particular evening and what was going on in my mind and what was the trigger that sort of got me going. Today we call it innovation. Back then I just called it a good idea. And I was sitting there, I was thinking to myself, there must be an easier way of doing this, because I was thinking of all my friends and they're out having a great time. And it's all been washed down with a nice cold beer on a nice evening like this. There must be a better way of doing things. And then I remembered my maths, basic maths. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't a genius in school at maths, but my basic maths were good. It was enough to take me into a dealing room in later years. But I remember thinking, actually, there's one of those laws of maths I could apply here. So I did the first calculation. I went, oh, that works. And again and again and again. And it worked. I proved it out. I'd found a way to shorten the whole process for each transaction by about 4 seconds. Armed with this great piece of news, I went up to the manager in charge at the time, Tim, and I said, Tim, sort of voila, here you go. I've an idea to cut back on all of this. Was he impressed? No. He looked at me. He sort of looked at my calculations and looked back at me and said, these calculations have been put together by brighter brains than you from our head office. They've been in place for years. You're hardly in the place a wet day. What would you know about it? So go back to work and continue doing what you're doing. So was I impressed? No, I was absolutely deflated. I always remember that. And so I just had to go off. Really, it took me a number of years to realize what had happened. I'd actually run into three of the obstacles to innovation. The first one being perception, the second one being presumption, and the third one being protectionism. So how do you overcome the obstacles to innovation? Let me start with perception. Perception is very much about how we did things in the past. It's about that was the way. You know, we see it in organizations all of the time, and they quote these rules that are there all of the time. Well, the world has moved on. We all should be moving on. We should be more agile in our approach to dealing with business. Why are you quoting terms and conditions to people? Why are you putting them through processes that are no longer valid? Would it not make sense to look at the various processes that you've got in your organization, map them out, and look for the gaps in them? What about collaborating with your internal, external audiences? Get them to contribute to what they need from you to make the processes more robust. Because you see, if you don't do this, what happens with many organizations is they just drop into complacency. Things are okay. It's the way we've always done it. Yeah, complacency is fine, but complacency leads to a loss in competitiveness, leads to a drop in sales, and ultimately a loss in shareholder value. Presumption. Presumption is always a beautiful one. I see it so often in business, and people presume, hey, you're young. What would you know about our business? What could you contribute to our business? You would think that's the mindset of possibly my generation. No, it's out there, as prevalent today as I've seen it. And what you're missing is the opportunity to harness some great ideas from people. So how do you overcome these? What you should be putting in place is channels of communication from bottom up, from top down, within your own organization, to allow people to express themselves, to get their ideas out in the right environment. If necessary, bring in outside trainers, because a lot of young people are quite coy, quite shy about sharing. So why not get them so that they feel confident in being able to speak, so that they're articulate in being able to speak to the people around them without judging them. Don't forget, all of the people within your own organization want to help. So why not share the greatest challenges that you've got? There's a large multinational organization, I won't mention their name, but they shared the top 3 challenges every month with their team in Dublin. And you know, Dublin is a hub spot for a lot of technology companies. So what did I see? It's an A3 poster portrait, 3 challenges on it. And where did I see it? Placed in front of me at a urinal. Out of curiosity, I had a look inside a cubicle door, and sure enough, there was one there as well. And I'm sure the ladies was no different. So what they were doing is taking every advantage, and maybe Rodin's the thinker had them sort of think of getting themselves into a different place. So really what you can see is how these challenges are out there and how you might overcome them. But I suppose the question you're asking is, why are you taking me back so far in a story that has little relevance to today? And I suppose really what I'm saying to you is, it has a huge amount of relevance, because I still see the same things happen. In relation to this organization, I said I'd put some sort of finances on these things. I did some rough calculations across the organization if what I had suggested had been put in place. At a conservative estimate, it was 25,000 hours of productivity that they could have saved on. And the final piece, which is kind of relevant as well, this organization caught in that mindset. Its share price now trades at 1/20th of what it used to be. But anyway, I suppose that's the past. I'll take this off. I was being commented about the tie and how smart I'm looking, but let's get back into being a bit more relevant to today. I was speaking with a bank manager. Yeah, and don't worry, it's not going to be all about finance, but I'll just keep it relevant. And I said to him, what are your biggest challenges at the moment? And he said, Alec, distressed mortgage holders. He said, since the recession, we've had more and more people there. We have all of these sort of onerous positions put on us from the central bank, or the equivalent to use the Bank of England, about how we manage them. I said, okay, tell me more about that. He said, yes, so we've to send them out a letter of engagement, which is part of a pack that includes a 12-page A4 document for them to fill in hard copy. I went, what? There must be a better way of doing that. And he said, no, that's what they have to do. So I said, what happens next? Well, when they fill that in, which, by the way, they could do online, and today we know the technology's there. Even if you hadn't got all of the information, you could partially fill it in, park it, come back, fill in more. You can actually upload other documents with it. This is not rocket science stuff. This is all out there. But this is how this organization is operating, and I'm going back less than a year ago. So the next stage is to phone the branch to get an appointment with me. Yes, you have to speak to a manager or any of my colleagues around the country. So what's the problem with that? Well, our phone system is quite dreadful, actually. You could be 20 to 40 minutes holding to get through to make the appointment. What? Like, I'm thinking to myself, if any of you guys listening to me today wanted to book a phone call with me, you go onto my website, or my email has it, and you just click it, and you can schedule an appointment with me in seconds. I'm talking about a large organization who are putting people through this various stages of getting through to eventually making something like an appointment. So I said, okay, tell me what's the next piece of that? Oh, it gets better, I can tell you. The next piece of this is you turn up, the person turns up with their form, and I have a quick look, he says, and then I have to upload it onto our system manually. What? Oh yeah, I've to upload it because it's configured differently to the way the form's laid out. And I said, how long does that take? Well, the whole thing with the customer is about an hour and a half. And tell me more about that. He said, yes, the customer has to stay there because I have to then print it out in hard copy and get them to sign it. I went, oh my God. So I said, how often are you doing this? How often are you doing this? And he said, hang on a sec. Hang on. He said, I said, how often are you doing this? And he said, twice a day. I said, how many days a week? He said, 5. I went, my God. When you start thinking about this, think of what's happening in terms of productivity here. Let's do some quick maths together. I'm not going to get you to get calculators out because I can see you all and you probably wouldn't bother and you'd only be texting anyway. So anyway, let me do some quick maths with you just together. Let's take this organization. So 3 hours a day, 5 days a week is 15 hours. There's 96 branches in this particular organization. That comes to 1,440 hours a week, times 52 comes to 74,880 hours in a year. Well, let's go mad. Not every person who's engaged in this process will have those full hours. So let's just divide it by 5. So we've got 75,000 because I've just rounded it up by 120 and divided by 5, and we've 15,000 hours of lost productivity. But I'm not stopped there. Let me just add something else to this, because people are always asking me, how do you work out the cost of an employee in a professional services firm or a firm like this? Okay, let's do the maths on that very quickly as well. The typical salary of this person in a bank manager's position ranges from 44 to 111,000 per annum. I'm going to pick 70,000 as a mean because it suits me to do so. What we do is we add what we call universal social charge. We add PRSI and we'll add a small contribution to the organization. I'm not going to add in pensions. I'm not going to add in all the other little bits and pieces and bonuses. We can round it up nicely to 80,000. That's the second part of that. This. How many hours will this person be working for the bank in a course of a year? 2020 is a leap year. Let's take off 104 days for Saturdays and Sundays, take off 9 days for bank holidays, 20 days for annual leave, 6 days, which is the annual sickness that people take off, and we're down to 227 days. Times 7 hours a day is 1,589 hours in a year. I'm going to round that to 1,600 hours in a year. So for your organization, somebody's costing you 18,000, or sorry, costing you 80,000 for 1,600 hours of time. And Luckily enough for me, that works out at €50 an hour. Let's go back to our original piece and multiply the figure that we had, if you remember what it was, 15,000 by 50, and suddenly we're up to $750,000 a year in lost productivity. Does anybody do the maths on this at all? What's happened? How do we overcome the barriers to productivity? One of the questions must be, how do we gather information when we're getting reports coming in from our network where there's problems happening? You see, what happens is, in this case, because I asked him, did you report this as an issue? Yes, I did on more than one occasion. Have your colleagues reported? Yes, I've talked at monthly meetings, and of course they've reported it. But you see, what's happening is people are collecting the information in head office, but not gathering it in a way in which they can understand the real challenge around it and the cost to the organization. Again, it's not rocket science, but how do you collate that information in a way that's relevant so that you can react? Why didn't the IT department get on top of it straight away? Number one is they were just too busy. And number two, it wasn't a priority for them. So make it a priority, because what else is costing the organization this amount of money? The second thing, which is quite interesting around it, is, and I discovered it when I was very young, and all the people that are on my radio show that I talk about who are involved in sort of the workplace, is head office versus branches. Nearly every one of them has said it's a different culture altogether. If you're working in a head office of an organization and working in a branch, you might as well be working for two different organizations. And that's crazy. So how do you get over that? Very simply, what you should do is allow people from head office to go out to the branches just for 1 month in every 2 years, just to experience what their colleagues are experiencing at the cold face, and vice versa, bring them in from outside so that they experience what head office and what's going on. Because when you cross-pollinate people, now they can share ideas because they both have an understanding of the challenges that each part of the organization is facing, rather than having two disparate parts of the organization pulling it against each other. Let me just move you on. I want to talk about, let's talk to a managing partner professional services firm. And he called me, and I've known him for quite a number of years, and he said, Alec, could you help me? My management team have been on to me, and we're having a bit of an issue retaining our staff, or something like that. I thought, that's a bit strange. Okay, so what's going on? Yeah, they're in my ear about this. Apparently, we're losing people, and I don't know what it is. It's probably just, a flowing workforce, all of this sort of thing. All right, fair enough. So just to appease them, he got me to talk. It was interesting chat with them. What they were saying is this: we're so busy, and he is so remote from the organization, that we're taking up a lot of slack here. Number one is we're losing people. Certainly we're losing people, but it's taking time out of time that we don't have available to ourselves. The second thing too, it unsettles the other people there. And I'm sure it must be costing the organization, because we know it's certainly costing the organization in terms of reputation. All right, I said, tell me, what is the feedback you're getting from the exit interviews you're doing with those who are leaving you? He said, exit interviews? No, we don't have time for anything like that. Okay, fair enough. So I went to speak to some of the staff. And I must say, what a great bunch of people they were. Young, vibrant, intelligent, third-level educated. Really, actually, very much in favor of the company, wanted to do their best for the company. So what's wrong? What was happening? We're too busy. And because we're too busy, the company are forcing us to do work that some of us are not qualified to do. And we can't turn it down. So we end up doing it. We're making mistakes, and we're feeling inept. And that's really leading to problems in terms of just, I suppose, mindfulness and well-being. We're just not in a good place. And so while we can do a certain amount of this because we're young, we can't do it continually. So what happens is the company just loses people. So that's quite interesting. I was talking to one of the other managers. I said, how's the company doing in terms of finances? It's flatlining. It's flatlined over the last 3 years. And I said, when you mean flatlining, what sort of profits make? He said, we're making probably around about 100,000 a year after everything's paid. You know, that's where we are. I thought, okay, it's not the worst case scenario. Yeah, but we've ambitions to double that or treble that. And you'd think with the amount of work that we're doing here, that we should be seeing some payback on all of this. I said, okay. Now, the accountant for the company I'm talking about, or the firm, had never done the maths on it. So very quickly, I did some basic mathematics. Now, you know yourself, how do you work out the cost of somebody who leaves your organization, replacing that person, training them up, onboarding them properly, and the investment you have in them, and then they leave and you have to go through the cycle. Conservatively, I'd reckon this company, it was costing them about 200,000 a year. So while they were all being focused, being very busy, trying to make a profit, the profit was leaking out of the jar at the far end, and nobody could see it because they were all so busy on the treadmill. And I can only hope that in the lockdown we've had over the last few months, where people have got a chance to get off that treadmill of life, that they've had a chance to reassess what they're doing. So how do you get over the obstacle of retaining talent? Remember, the people you've got are only as good as the training that you give them. They're only as good as the investment that you make, and only as good as the culture within the organization that you're running. They should be part of putting that all together so people understand it, so people have a shared journey where self-leadership is understood and how that works and the boundaries of that. Make them part of the solution, not part of the problem. It's about communication. Simple steps to retain the talent, because the cost to lose them is much higher. Let me move on to the final topic. I'm talking about resilience. The final part of resilience. This has been an interesting one for me, in the sense that most people talk about resilience. It's one of those buzzwords we've heard over the last couple of years. And people have a sort of hairy idea really what it might be about. Well, you know, it's about survival. It's about getting tough. Well, there's nothing like a knockdown to get you tough, is there? And so many companies have been out there and having to, you know, struggle and fight their way. But let me take it on to a bigger scale. We've had an interesting situation here in Ireland because we were a bit slow off the blocks with the whole COVID-19 situation in terms of how we are going to manage it. And I was interested to follow the story of what happened. And I'll tell you what happened. Let me give you a bit of background that might just interest you on it, just to show you how you can get distracted and the obstacles that are there. The reason we were slow off the blocks is we had a general election on the 8th of February. So there wasn't any politician interested in anything other than their own survival in the weeks leading up to that election. So the world could have died and they still would have been focused on their own careers. The Fine Gael party, which is slightly right of centre, were a minority government supported by another right of centre party, got decimated in the elections. And they got decimated on three things: health, homelessness, and housing. And they just got wiped out. They lost about a third of their seats. Sufficient enough for them to step forward and say, listen, we're going into opposition. That's the only place for us. There's no point in us trying to do anything else. And we're going to let the rest of you guys sort it all out. Now, you can be sure, if any of you know any of the history of Ireland, the dynamics of the politics over here are quite interesting, so I won't take you through that. But I just want to talk about what actually then happened. We had lockdown before a new government could be formed. So the party that were on their way out had to continue doing what they were doing. And wow, you should have seen them step up to the plate. The first thing they had to do was they had to find all of these beds, all of these places, all of the health systems in place for the potential of the coronavirus victims that were likely to be thrust upon us. So what did they do? They cleared the wards, made more wards available. They built temporary hospital. They actually commandeered some of the private hospitals. And with a stroke of a pen, they had the health system sorted out in a matter of weeks, something in the previous 4 years they couldn't do anything with. Now, I know you're going to say, You know, there's going to be long-term repercussions. Yes, but I'm talking about the mindset of getting things done here. Literally in a couple of weeks, the healthcare system was now focused on dealing with a common enemy. The second thing around that was procurement. My goodness, procurement. What a dysfunctional thing we have in this country. You know, you want to sell paper clips to a government department, you probably need to be engaged in a 6-month process. It's just absolutely ludicrous. And I think we've all come across these sort of things. But yet this government was able to buy 200 million euro worth of PPE with the stroke of a pen over a couple of days. And sure, it worked out. Of course, it worked out perfectly well. Yeah, bits and pieces here. But without the bureaucracy in place, they were able to do their job. The next piece of it, of course, was in terms of education. Our prime ministers, you all call them over there. The prime minister here got out with a clear 5-stage plan that led the people through what we have gone through here in the most clear and easy way to follow. Because you see, he didn't have to get involved in debates, in party fighting, other parties coming in with their contributions, people sniping from all sorts of sides. So all of the other things, the politics that hold up everything, nobody could come in because they knew they would be in serious trouble. And so what happened is we went through this. And in fact, as we come out, there's over the course of the last couple of 3 or 4 or 5 days, I think there's about 2 or 3 deaths. We've really sort of gone right down. But what's happened? It's allowed them time to form a new government. And the party I was just telling you about, who were heading off into opposition and quite happy to do so, rose in the polls. Guess where they are now? They're in a coalition. They're back in with the other 2 other parties. Within the space of less than 10 days, we have had 2 major scandals, and we've had a distraction around the politics of Ireland. So much so, now we have ambiguity around social distancing, ambiguity around the next stage of the process, and ambiguity around the travel that's allowed within Ireland. So suddenly, we're back where we were. The obstacles, bureaucracy, party sniping, pettiness, party politics have got into the room. So really what I want to say as I just wrap up is this. What we're trying to do is, for any organization, is the synergy of the organization. And the more harmony we have, the better we are. I've talked about the struggles that people have about innovation and productivity. And I've talked about the hidden costs that are very, very expensive there that people should have a look at. I've talked about the retention of people within an organization and how you foster that culture within that organization to make sure that you retain them. And finally, I'm talking about resilience and the sniping and the bureaucracy and all of the things that are allowed to come in to derail people. The good news for everybody is this: as a person who's been an SME for 40 years, they're the most agile of all businesses out there. And a lot of large companies tend to forget that they're actually just made up of a group of SMEs, just performing different functions within them. But the difference is with the SME community is their agility. And with that agility, they are able to embrace the power of synergy. Thank you.